All right, everybody, I am Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon and The Blackest Heart, both published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today, I'm going to be reviewing... Oh, gosh, I about knocked the camera over. We'll edit that part out. I'm going to be reviewing book number 3 in Lawrence Block's Matthew Scudder Detective series. Book number 3 is called In the Midst of Death. You know, I've got the entire Matthew Scudder series up here. There they all are. You can see them. You know, probably saw my review of book number 1 and book number 2. If not, just go ahead and type my name, Brian Lee Durfee, in to YouTube and then type in Lawrence Block, and those reviews will come up. That's how the internet works, folks. You just type things in and things appear. In the Midst of Death, we always talk about the covers first. Let's talk about this cover, folks. Because it took me a while to figure out what the fuck was going on. So what we've got here is an illustration of a grassy field, a dead guy, and a sickle with blood on it. Took me a minute or two to figure out that's what was happening because I don't like the angle. I mean, the illustrator, I don't know who it was. I think it was probably done in the late 80s or early 90s. I'm not sure. But the illustrator, the foreshortened dead guy, makes it hard to figure out that he's a dead guy. And then I wasn't sure if this was... You know what? From a distance, I don't know whether it's like the earth is on fire. I don't know whether I'm on a seashore. I just was confused as hell for the longest time until I figured out it was a sickle and a dead guy and laying in the field. Maybe other people don't have that problem. So I'm going to give this cover a big fat fail. You know, I usually give all covers a glowing review because I think that most graphic design and illustration is fucking dope. But once in a while, I run across one and I'm like, yeeks. Holy shit. Anyway, In the Midst of Death, enough of that. What is this about? So, this is about our unlicensed private investigator, Matthew Scudder. He's an ex-cop. And book 1, book 2, and now book 3, we slowly get... Things are slowly starting to be revealed about his past. And, you know, in book 1, not much was revealed. In book 2, we find out that when he was a cop, he was involved in a shooting, and one of his bullets ricocheted off the cement and killed a 7-year-old girl off in the distance who was innocent to the whole scene. And that's traumatized him. And now in book 3, we start to find out that even when he was a cop, he might not have been the most honest of cops. In other words, you know, he might have been skimming a little off the top during a drug bust and a few things like that. You know, the guy wants to do the right thing. You know that the guy's a good guy and he wants good people to win. But what happens is this dude, this police officer comes to him and is like, this police officer is dirty himself and he's being framed. He comes to Scudder to be like, hey, there's a dead prostitute. People think I'm the one that killed the prostitute. Everybody knows that I've been a dirty cop my whole career. And not only have I been a dirty cop, but I've kind of been a snitch. I've snitched out other dirty cops. And he's like, I think this is a frame and a setup by other cops because they don't like me. And Scudder's kind of like, yeah, you don't seem like that likable of a guy. He's like, yeah, I mean, I did some dirt when I was a cop, but nothing but everybody knows your reputation. And I wasn't even in the league you were in. But he's also realizes, yeah, this guy is innocent of killing this prostitute. And so he wants to do the right thing and help out and figure out who did kill the prostitute. Because, you know, that's the right thing to do. That's the basis of this story. And then as Scudder gets more involved in the case, you know, Scudder, he's not like Sherlock Holmes detective agency where, you know, they walk around the murder scene and they're like, oh, there's some coffee grounds over here, which must mean the murderer might have drank some coffee. So we need to find out what people in this village drink this kind of coffee. Or, oh, look, there's a there's a pair of scissors up here that looks to be the murder weapon. These are only bought in a certain store. We need to go find out who bought those from that store. Now, they're not like, I mean, Scudder, he doesn't do any of that shit. What he does is he goes and meets all the players that may or may not be involved in the death, and he talks to them. He just interviews them, figures it out that way. I mean, he reads people, even though he's drunk half the time, which is another big part of the plot, is Matthew Scudder's drinking problem. I mean, he drinks bourbon and Coke, bourbon and Sprite, bourbon and milk, bourbon. He drinks bourbon. He's always drinking bourbon. And sometimes people are like, dude, you're an alcoholic. And he's like, I don't think I am. I think I'm all right. But you can clearly tell he's fucked up in a lot of ways. He is suffering from some post-traumatic stress from his previous life as a cop, and the bourbon and his family life and everything else, all of it combined, right? And so he goes out and he just talks to people. I mean, he goes up to the police that are accusing this other cop of killing the prostitute, and he just interviews them. Just straight up confronts them about things and tries to figure it out that way. But he gets involved in this dark, seedy underbelly world of prostitution, and finds out that this prostitute was involved with a lot of the upper crust of the police department, a lot of the upper crust of the government, like government officials. Like, this prostitute probably had a lot of reasons for a lot of people to, it's just like, she was just doing the wrong dudes left and right. And it was catching up to those dudes. And so they had to off her and get rid of this cop they didn't like at the same time by framing her for the murder. That's the plot. That's the general plot. Great, great story. Because we love it when Matthew Scudder is just crawling through the underbelly of New York City, just trying to figure out these murders, these grim, gritty murders on these grim, gritty streets. I mean, and this book was written in 1976, back when, Serpico and all of that stuff was going on with, the bad cops and the dirty cops and all that. And so you just get a real sense of what it might be like in the 1970s in New York. And I'm telling you, if you know anything about the history of New York City, the 1970s were a violent, violent period of time in the New York City's history. It wasn't, even the 1980s were bad. It wasn't until about 1993 where, I can't remember which governor it was, maybe Giuliani, changed a few rules on policing, and almost overnight, a lot of the crime disappeared. But back in the day, man, it was a bad place. You didn't want to be there. Anyway, and this book really describes that. Really gets into that. Anyway, what do I think of In the Midst of Death, book number 3 in the Matthew Scudder series? I think these are each book is building upon the other. I think if you're going to read this series and really get the most out of it, I think you do need to read from the beginning and see how Matthew Scudder sort of changes over time, and things like that. Because he does, we're getting more of his personality more and more with each book, and it's making him more interesting to follow. That's all I gotta say. So I give book number 3 a 8.5 out of 10. Good book. I loved the dirty cop angle of the story. Loved it.